Hi everyone, welcome back. Today we are discussing issue 2 of Batman: The Dark Knight Returns by Frank Miller, which opens with this great piece of cover art right here, with Batman as a huge hulking mass. He's beaten up pretty badly, but still really terrifying, reminding us, in case you forgot, of the masculinity and violence inherent to this text. Now, last time I talked about Batman and his use of violence and was critical of it. But in order to properly judge a hero's use of violence, you have to take a look at what kind of enemy he's fighting. So let's take a closer look at the main villains of this issue, the mutants. The mutants are unlike any other villain we've come across in this class because they don't really have any clear motivation for their crimes. And their crimes are really heinous. They murder, kidnap, and rape. And what's more, they apparently have to meet a certain quota of violent crimes. Let me pause for a second so you can really let that sink in. They're murdering people, slice and dice, for no other reason than to meet a murder quota. Who does that? And why? In a big speech at the Gotham City dump, the leader of the mutant gang declares, "Only when they die by our hands and see their women raped will they know. We have the strength, we have the will, and now we have the guns. Gotham City belongs to the mutants." Okay, so they want to take over Gotham City and they want to kill and violate people, but the question still remains, why? He never mentions the greed of Gotham's wealthiest, for example, or corruption of government officials. He doesn't say it's because they're jobless or starving, poor or oppressed in some way. The author Frank Miller doesn't give us any hints as to a reason either. Do they want to get laid? Did their mothers not hug them enough? Are they suffering from some poor mental health conditions? Nothing. The mutants just seem to be evil. They're just pure evil, and that's that. This should remind you of our previous discussions about idealism and materialism. Remember that idealism, for the purposes of this class, is the understanding that things happen in the world because of ideas. And materialism is the understanding that things happen because of tangible material conditions. You might call it practicality. In this book, the mutants simply embody the idea of evil. They have no material or practical reasons for doing what they do. Now, in real life, nobody's motivations are quite this simple, so we have to understand the mutants as a symbolic representation of evil, rather than fully fleshed out characters with deep dreams and thoughts and desires. So now that we know that intentions and motivations don't matter here, what exactly is this symbol of evil supposed to do for us readers? Remember that Frank Miller wrote The Dark Knight Returns in the 1980s. A lot of media produced in the 80s was very macho and very violent. Film scholars have a number of theories to explain this. Perhaps it was a reactionary pushback against second-wave feminism and the growing presence of women in the workplace. Or these very masculine texts reflect the growing tension of the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union. The Soviet-American Cold War began after World War II, and it's often thought of as an ideological battle between capitalism, that's America, and communism, that's the Soviet Union. No actual fighting took place between the US and the USSR, which is why we call it cold. Instead, each superpower stockpiled weapons of mass destruction, including nuclear weapons, and took sides in smaller regional conflicts. Besides these proxy wars and amassing weapons, the struggle for dominance between these two countries was also expressed indirectly through psychological warfare, propaganda campaigns, espionage, far-reaching embargoes, rivalry at sports events, and technological competitions like being the first to go to space. So you have two sides growing their stockpile of weapons so that they can threaten and protect themselves from the enemy. The logic goes, if the other guy can see how big my gun is, he'll leave me alone. But then the other guy goes and gets a bigger gun, so I have to go and get an even bigger gun. And this keeps going until we both have more weapons than we could ever actually use. Enough weapons to destroy the world. And I'm not being metaphoric. The fear of mutually assured destruction and a nuclear holocaust was so strong that scientists developed the doomsday clock, which counts down to the end of the world at midnight. When Frank Miller's Batman came out, the clock was set at only 3 minutes to midnight. Fun fact, the doomsday clock is still used today, and it is currently set at 1.5 minutes to midnight, but not for Cold War reasons, for climate change reasons. References to war are made constantly in The Dark Knight Returns. Both Batman and Police Commissioner Gordon describe their fight against criminals in Gotham as a war. Take a look at this scene where Gordon meets his replacement as police commissioner, Ellen Yindel. He talks about the attacks on Pearl Harbor in World War II, and a conspiracy theory that says Roosevelt knew Pearl Harbor was going to be attacked, and he let it happen. Gordon can't decide if he believes the conspiracy theory. He decides not to make a decision about it one way or the other. It's just too big, he says. But he also says Pearl was what got us off our duffs in time to stop the Axis. We won the war. He doesn't come out and say it, but I think Gordon and the author are okay with some violence on the wrong side, if it brings us to the right side in the end. But for all of their talk of war, crime fighting in Gotham isn't really literally a war. And a Cold War isn't really a war either. So, I wonder, is the violence we see here in this comic the logical conclusion of a Cold War? What I mean is, as the mutants grow increasingly violent, so too must Batman become increasingly violent. Each side just keeps getting bigger guns, so to speak. And we see Frank Miller's version of Batman bending a lot of the time-honored rules of the character. He's using guns now, for example, but only with rubber bullets. Honest. And it's not clear if Batman is responsible, directly or indirectly, for some of the deaths we might be seeing in this issue. But let's think about this method of bringing out the big guns, and then the bigger guns, and then the even bigger guns as the quote-unquote war escalates. Doesn't this approach actually bring Gotham closer to that mutually assured destruction? Isn't the city and innocent civilians going to get caught in the crossfire? This is another one of Dr. Wolper's theories on Batman. We've talked about how Miller paints Wolper as a totally unqualified quack. Even the way he talks is annoying, all of those unnecessarily big words and pseudo-intellectual nonsense. But let's see if he might be onto something. Wolper says the public psyche is a vast, moist membrane, and that through the media, Batman has struck this membrane a vicious blow. The result is that a whole new generation, confused and angry, will be bent to the matrix of Batman's pathological self-delusion. Alright, first, let's translate that. Basically what he's saying is that Batman is influencing people through the television news coverage of him. And these people, motivated by Batman, will start to act the way he does, which Wolper believes is pathological and wrong. But isn't this exactly what we're seeing happen in this issue? We have a new Robin, a girl named Carrie, who buys a Halloween costume with her lunch money after Batman rescues her from some mutants in issue 1. She attempts to do some parkour or something on the streets of Gotham, and lights a firecracker in the pants of a street gambler. Sounds like Wolper's theory has come true. She's emulating Batman, or at least she's trying to. But wait, there's more. We have 3 more examples of civilians under the influence of Batman. The first is Arnold Crimp, who has something against Led Zeppelin and women who wear makeup. So he shoots up a porno theater and kills 3. The second is a former boxer named Iron Man Vasquez. He's being coerced to do the dirty work of a small-time crime boss named Biggers, and it seems like he's suffering some drug addiction of some sort. And after reading about Batman, he tries to shoot somebody, maybe Biggers, before he himself is killed. And finally, Peppy Spandek, who doesn't like Batman, But when a woman gets mugged outside of his shop, he jumps to defend her with his rolling pin. 3 examples of people being influenced by news coverage of Batman. 1, clearly wrong. Another, ambiguous as to who is in the wrong and who is in the right. And the last is just an example of a good citizen doing a good deed. How are we supposed to judge Batman now with these 3 conflicting cases? Well, there is one more to look at. The Sons of Batman. The big fight scene of this issue is between the mutant leader and Batman. In the first round, Batman is hurt too badly to go on. In the second round, Batman deals the mutant leader a humiliating defeat. So humiliating that the mutants decide to become the Sons of Batman. Now, Batman seems to have played no part in this decision. They made it on their own. He isn't leading them in any way. Don't forget that the mutants were our symbol of pure evil. They don't have a motivation behind their crimes, just evil for evil's sake. So what does it mean that they can make this switch so quickly? The theory that Batman is actually on the side of evil is coming up again. How else could all these evil people switch to Batman's side so easily, unless Batman himself was also evil? I mean, what makes Batman different from the mutant gang? He says they're not human, comparing them to rats. But isn't he kind of not human too, as Batman? Both of them function outside of the law. Or, here's the competing theory, good cannot triumph over evil without substantial power. It's not that the Sons of Batman were looking for another evil guy to follow. Rather, the good guy Batman has taught them the error of their ways by his show of power. Now, we've talked about doing bad things for a good cause, but we haven't talked about what that means in terms of power. There's the old saying that might makes right. That is, whoever has the power has the right to decide what's morally good and bad. And if you disagree with them, well, they have the power, so they'll shut you up real fast. Abraham Lincoln flipped that saying into right makes might, meaning that if you are on the side of good, you will find the motivation and the strength to achieve the good you set out to do. Both of these are problematic. Might makes right is how dictatorships and tyranny happen. Right makes might makes it sound like if you're a good guy and you lose, you must have not believed hard enough or worked hard enough. How does right make might apply to Batman? Well, he does have a good cause overall. He wants to stop criminals so no one has to die like his parents did. It was this reason that turned him into the mighty Batman. He's also sacrificing his own personal freedom in order to help people. His personal life, in the form of Bruce Wayne, seems completely erased with the return of Batman. And of course, we do see people like Carrie/Robin and Peppy Spandek being inspired by Batman to stand up for themselves and others. The resurgence of the common man's will to resist, as news reporter Lana Lang puts it. But might makes right also applies. Batman can seem like a tyrant or oppressor of others. He has the power, even without legal authority, to make things go his way. He even fights legitimate police officers when it suits him. He doesn't listen to the input of others. When Alfred suggests Batman not take on another Robin because of what happened to Jason, Batman has this weird response. I will never forget Jason. He was a good soldier. He honored me. But the war goes on. What? That seems cold-hearted. And we'll soon see that Batman is really strict with Robin. You may have noticed that the media is really important to this story. It's one of the main ways we get to figure out how we want to judge Batman, because everyone on the media is judging Batman in many different ways. No one on the news can agree on what Batman is, and I'm sure in this class we will have our disagreements as well. But we'll check in about what we think Batman is and how he works, again at the end of this graphic novel. It's an especially interesting question to ask. Is Batman good or evil? When you have two of the greatest superheroes, Batman and Superman, fighting against each other to the death, a battle we see foreshadowed in this issue. The last thing I want to talk about is the women in this issue. Now, I've talked a lot about the macho masculinity of this comic book, but we can't forget that Robin is a girl, the first female Robin, and the new commissioner, Ellen Yindel. It's a big deal that she's a woman. Carrie, as Robin, is now a superhero of sorts, or at least she's a sidekick to one. But she is fighting crime, and she's also the opposite of Batman in many ways. He's a big, old, tough guy, dark and grim and macho. She's a small girl, a child, dressed in bright primary colors given to pranks more than violence, though she does follow Batman's orders. I wonder if she's there to soften the harshness of Batman, to give him a little bit more humanity, to give him someone to care about. Perhaps she is proof that Batman is an anti-hero, not just a plain old villain, after all. As strict as he is with her, he is protective of her too. She's very dependent on him in a way. Ellen Yindel, on the other hand, is very independent and pretty tough herself. Gordon has his reservations about a female commissioner, but he seems to respect her and her work once he meets her. She takes a tough stance on Batman, sure to make her unpopular with some people. And it's a bit of a power move for a young female officer her first day on the job. And of course, she's drawn pretty androgynously, a little bit masculine. Is she overcompensating to make up for her femininity? That is, has she got something to prove, being so young and a woman in a man's world, in a man's job? It's hard to compare Carrie and Yindel or talk about the role of women at this point. But we're starting to see a bit more commentary on the fairer sex come through in the story. And the comic's take on gender and sexuality is just going to get weirder in the next issue, where we see a confrontation between Batman and the Joker in a carnival tunnel of love. Read issue 3 for next week. For discussion boards, let's take it easy today as well, since we're still in week 1 of our transition to digital learning. All I want for your original post is another discussion question posted to the board. Now, I only talked about a few aspects of the reading for today. There's a lot I didn't cover, so feel free to talk about any of the things that I didn't bring up. More about media coverage, the actual fights between Batman and the mutant leader, Commissioner Gordon and the way he talks about Sarah, his wife, how the government is portrayed through either Gotham's mayor, who's kind of a bumbling idiot, or the mysterious president of the United States, who we haven't actually gotten to see yet. Anything in issue 1 or issue 2 is totally fair game for this discussion board. Just please stick to this particular Batman text. Outside Batman comics, besides The Dark Knight Returns, are not fair game. And of course, responses to these discussion questions can earn you up to 3 participation points per class day. That's all for today. Until next time.